My sister thought destroying my career for a TikTok prank was hilarious. She laughed as I lost my six-figure job, my luxury apartment, and my dignity. But when I rebuilt my life in the shadows and became her secret landlord, the laughter stopped. My name is Ebony, and I am 32 years old. I learned the hard way that blood is not thicker than water, especially when that water is full of sharks. Before I tell you how I served my family a cold dish of revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the strong one who everyone took for granted. The day my life imploded started like any other high-stakes Tuesday in corporate Atlanta. I was sitting in my home office wearing my lucky blazer, staring at the Zoom grid on my dual monitors. This was the culmination of 6 months of sleepless nights. I was presenting to the medical board of St. Jude's Hospital, closing a $5 million pharmaceutical contract that would secure my promotion to regional vice president. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was watching with that hawk-like intensity of his, waiting for me to land the plane. I took a deep breath and unmuted my microphone to deliver the closing argument on our new oncology drug pricing. Suddenly, a screeching noise cut through the audio feed. My screen flickered. Before I could check my connection, a voice boomed through the speakers of every board member on the call. It was loud, vulgar, and horrifyingly familiar. It was a recording of me, but the words were twisted, spliced, and completely fabricated using AI voice cloning. The voice that sounded exactly like mine started screaming profanities at the head of the medical board, accusing him of taking bribes and making grotesque comments about his wife. Then the voice switched to insulting Mr. Henderson, calling him incompetent and mocking his hairpiece. I frantically tried to mute my microphone, but the system was locked. The hackers had total control. I watched in horror as the faces on the screen went from professional interest to shock and then to absolute fury. The head of the board stood up and disconnected the call without a word. Mr. Henderson remained for 5 seconds, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Ebony, you are done!" he roared before the screen went black. My phone started buzzing immediately. It was not a call back to explain. It was a notification from IT that my company email access had been revoked. 5 minutes later, a courier was at my door with a termination letter. They did not even wait for an investigation. The reputational damage was immediate and catastrophic. Gross misconduct, violation of ethics, immediate termination with cause. I sat there shaking, my career incinerated in less than 60 seconds. Then my personal phone pinged with a text from my younger sister Chantel. It was a link to a TikTok livestream. I clicked it, my stomach churning. There was Chantel holding a gaming headset, laughing hysterically. "Guys, did you hear that I just pranked my sister's boring corporate meeting?" Her boss's face was priceless. Like and share for part 2. She had hacked my meeting. My own sister had destroyed my livelihood for internet clout. I dialed Chantel again, my fingers slipping on the glass screen because I was shaking so violently. She declined the call. I called again. Finally, she picked up, but she did not put the phone to her ear. I could hear the tinny echo of her voice reverberating through a speaker. She was still live streaming. "Say hello to the fans?" "Ebony," she chirped, her voice bright and artificial. "Everyone is asking about the lady who got fired. You are trending on Twitter." I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "Chantel, turn the camera off right now," I hissed. "You just ruined my life. This is not a joke. I lost a $5 million contract. I lost my job. I likely lost my license to practice in this industry." Chantel let out an exaggerated sigh that I knew was a performance for her audience. "You are always so dramatic. It was just a prank call. It is satire. Look at the numbers, Ebony. My follower count just jumped by 50,000 in 20 minutes. Do you know how much a brand deal is worth with these metrics? I am literally building an empire here, and you are crying about some stiff corporate job." She was monetizing my destruction. The realization hit me like a physical blow. "You committed a crime, Chantel," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You hacked a secure corporate line. That is a felony. Do not be a hater just because I am the creative one, she shot back. Anyway, I have to go. My comments section is blowing up, and I promise to do a story time video about how uptight you are. Bye, sis. The line went dead. I stared at the black screen of my phone, unable to comprehend the level of narcissism I had just witnessed. She had not even paused to ask if I was okay. She viewed my career, which I had built with blood, sweat, and tears for a decade, as nothing more than a prop for her internet fame. But the universe was not done with me yet. A notification dinged on my laptop. It was an urgent email from the legal department of my former company. The subject line was in all caps. Notice of intent to sue for damages. My breath hitched in my throat. I opened the attachment. It was a formal letter from the firm's external counsel accusing me of gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of reputational harm. They were not just firing me, they were destroying me. The letter stated they were seeking damages to cover the lost contract value plus legal fees. We are talking millions of dollars. I immediately opened my banking app to transfer my savings to a secure account before they could touch it. Login failed. Account frozen. Contact your branch. I tried my credit cards. Declined. In the span of an hour, my sister had turned me from a high-powered executive into a destitute defendant. I sat in the silence of my luxury apartment, which I could no longer pay for, and realized that the war had just begun. I drove to my parents' house in Cascade Heights, running on fumes both literally and metaphorically. The sprawling red brick colonial had always stood as a monument to the Addams family's success, a symbol of Black excellence in Atlanta. Today it looked like a fortress built to keep out the unworthy. I parked my car and ran up the driveway, my heels clicking urgently against the pavement. I needed guidance. I needed my father, who had navigated corporate America for 30 years. I needed my mother, who always preached about family unity. I burst through the front door, expecting to find them worried about me. I expected hugs. I expected outrage on my behalf. I found them in the living room, but the atmosphere was not one of concern for their eldest daughter. It was a war room. My father Desmond sat in his leather armchair, his eyes glued to his iPad. He did not even look up when I entered. "Dad," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "They froze my accounts. The company is suing me. I do not know what to do." Desmond swiped angrily on his screen, his jaw tight. "You do not know what to do," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You should have thought about that before you let the internet drag your sister through the mud." I blinked, confused. Drag her? She destroyed my career, Dad. She hacked a confidential meeting. Desmond finally looked at me, and the coldness in his eyes made me step back. "And now she's getting death threats, Ebony. People are calling her a saboteur. They are canceling her sponsorship deals. Do you know how hard she has worked to build her brand? You let this get out of hand. If you had just laughed it off like a normal person instead of screaming at her like a banshee, none of this would have happened. You made her look like a villain." I felt the room spin. He was blaming me. I was the one with the termination letter in my purse, but he was worried about Chantel losing a few likes. My mother Viola walked in from the kitchen holding a tray of tea. She looked impeccable as always in her silk blouse and pearls, but her expression was made of stone. "Sit down, Ebony," she commanded, placing the tray on the coffee table. "We need to handle this PR nightmare immediately." I sank onto the sofa, relief washing over me. "Thank you, Mom. I knew you would have a plan. I need a lawyer and maybe a loan until I can unfreeze my assets." Viola laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A loan? No, Ebony. We are not talking about you. We are talking about Chantel's reputation." She pulled a typed document from her pocket and slid it across the table toward me. "We drafted a statement for you. You are going to go live on Instagram and read this. You will say that you were in on the joke. You will say that the termination was a staged skit for content, and that you and Chantel are planning a joint venture. You need to humanize her again." I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. "You want me to lie. You want me to tell the world that I am a clown so that Chantel can keep selling detox tea." "Mom, I lost my health insurance. I am facing a lawsuit that could bankrupt me. Viola sipped her tea calmly. And whose fault is that? You always take things too seriously. If you do this for your sister, maybe we can discuss helping you with groceries. But until you fix Chantel's image, do not ask us for a dime. Family protects family, Ebony. It is time you started acting like it. The front door swung open with a careless force that made the hallway chandelier tremble. Brad sauntered in, dragging a set of Callaway golf clubs that likely cost more than my first car. He was wearing a pastel polo shirt that was 2 sizes too tight across his chest, the kind of outfit that screamed country club wannabe. His face was flushed from the heat, or perhaps from the 3 mimosas he probably had at brunch. He stopped when he saw me sitting on the sofa, my face streaked with tears, my parents towering over me like disappointed deities. "Oh, look who it is," he sneered, dropping his clubs with a loud clatter that made my mother wince. "The corporate superstar returns to the nest. Did you finally get fired for being too intense, or did your boss just get tired of your face?" I wiped my eyes and stood up, trying to muster some dignity. "This does not concern you, Brad. I am talking to my parents." Brad laughed, a short, barking sound that grated on my nerves. "Everything in this house concerns me, Ebony. I am part of this family, a bigger part than you, apparently." He walked over to the minibar in the corner and poured himself a glass of scotch without asking. "I heard about your little incident. Chantel called me. She is a mess, you know, crying her eyes out because her big sister cannot take a joke. You really are toxic." I glared at him. "Toxic? I just lost my career, Brad. I am being sued for millions, and your wife is profiting from it." Brad took a sip of his drink and swirled the ice cubes, looking bored. "So what do you want?" "Money. Is that why you are here, begging for a handout?" He stepped closer, his cologne overpowering the room. "Let me be clear, Ebony. Do not even think about asking me for a dime. My money is tied up in high-yield real estate investments. I am building generational wealth here, not running a charity for unemployed failures. I know you always thought you were the smart one with your fancy degree and your big corporate job. But look at you now. You are nothing, and I am the one holding the purse strings in this family." I saw the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. He had always hated me. He hated that I saw through his buzzwords and his fake investment schemes. He hated that I asked questions about his returns when he tried to pitch his latest crypto scam to my father. Now he finally had the upper hand, and he was going to squeeze every ounce of joy out of it. My father nodded in agreement, looking at Brad with a respect he had never shown me. "Brad is right, Ebony. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. We cannot jeopardize the family's financial stability just because you made a mistake. You are 32 years old. Figure it out." I looked from my father to Brad, realizing with a sinking heart that I was completely alone in this room. They did not see a daughter or a sister in crisis. They saw a liability, and liabilities were to be cut loose. My mother set her teacup down on the saucer with a sharp clink that sounded like a judge slamming a gavel. "There is one more thing, Ebony," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "We need the keys to the Mercedes." I froze. My car, the obsidian black E-Class that I had paid for with my own bonuses. It was my pride and joy, my symbol of independence. But there was a catch, a technicality that hung over my head like a guillotine. When I bought it 5 years ago, my credit score was recovering from student loans, so my father had signed the title. I paid the down payment. I paid the monthly notes. I paid the insurance. But legally, on paper, it belonged to Desmond Adams. "Mom," I said slowly, my voice trembling, "I need my car. How am I supposed to get to interviews? How am I supposed to get around?" Viola stood up and smoothed her skirt, looking down at me with an expression that was almost pitying. "You do not have any interviews, Ebony. You are toxic goods right now. And besides, we have a more pressing emergency. Your sister is suffering." I stared at her. Suffering. She is laughing on TikTok. She is monetizing my pain. Viola shook her head, her eyes wide with feigned distress. You do not see the hate comments she is getting. People are calling her mean. She is having panic attacks, Ebony. She needs to get away. She needs to disconnect and heal. We are going to sell the car to fund a wellness retreat for her in Tulum. She needs first-class travel and a private villa to recover from the trauma you caused her. The room spun. They wanted to sell my car, the car I paid for, to send the person who ruined my life on a luxury vacation. Dad, I pleaded, turning to Desmond. You cannot let her do this. I paid every cent for that car. You know I did. Desmond refused to meet my eyes. He looked at the floor, studying the pattern of the Persian rug. Your mother is right, he mumbled. Chantel is fragile. We have to prioritize her mental health. And technically, it is my car. If you want to avoid legal trouble for unauthorized use of my property, you will hand over the keys. Now. Brad let out a low whistle from the corner. Ouch. Looks like you are taking the bus home, corporate superstar. He held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Give them here, Ebony. Unless you want me to call the police and report it stolen. I looked at the three of them. My father, the coward. My mother, the manipulator. And my brother-in-law, the vulture. They had stripped me of my job, my reputation, and my savings. Now they were taking my mobility. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the key fob. It felt like I was handing over my last shred of dignity. I pulled the keys out and dropped them into Brad's waiting hand. He caught them with a smirk and tossed them to my father. Smart choice, Ebony, he said. Maybe the walk home will give you time to reflect on how you let this family down. I walked out of the house that I had helped pay to renovate and stepped into the humid Atlanta heat. I had no car. I had no money. I started walking toward the bus stop, my heels sinking into the asphalt, knowing that I had truly hit rock bottom. I returned to my apartment complex in Buckhead later that afternoon, feeling like a ghost haunting my own life. The concierge, who usually greeted me with a smile, now avoided my gaze. When I reached my door, there was an envelope taped to it. It was not a friendly note. It was an eviction notice, or rather a lease termination notice effective immediately. I called the leasing office, my voice shaking. There has been a mistake, I said. I have never missed a payment. The property manager's voice was cold and professional. It is not about missed payments, Ms. Adams. Our lease agreement has a clause regarding employment verification and reputational risk. Given the recent publicity surrounding your termination and the lawsuit, we cannot have the media camped out in our lobby. You have 24 hours to vacate. 24 hours. To pack up 10 years of my life. To find somewhere to go with zero income and a frozen bank account. I called my mother again, swallowing my pride. Mom, I have nowhere to go. They are kicking me out. Can I stay in the guest room just for a few days until I figure this out? Viola's response was immediate and sharp. Absolutely not. We have guests coming for the church fundraiser next week. We cannot have you here bringing down the mood with your drama. Besides, Chantel needs that room for her yoga practice. It is her safe space. You will have to find somewhere else. I tried my father. Dad, please, I am your daughter. I am about to be homeless. Desmond sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced by a fly. Ebony, you are an adult. You made your bed, now lie in it. Maybe this will teach you some humility. We cannot enable your failure. If we let you stay, you will never learn to pick yourself up. It is tough love, sweetheart. Tough love. It felt more like hate. I hung up and stared at the empty boxes I had managed to scavenge from the recycling bin. I had no car. I had no home. I had no family. I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, my business suits, my laptop, a few sentimental items that suddenly felt heavy with memories of a life that no longer existed. I left the rest. The designer furniture, the art, the books, they were just things, now anchors dragging me down. I dragged my suitcases to the lobby and called a rideshare using the last $20 on a prepaid debit card I had found in a drawer. As I waited, Brad pulled up in his flashy red sports car, the top-down music blaring. He slowed as he saw me standing on the curb with my meager belongings. Moving out already, he called out over the bass. Good riddance. We do not want your bad vibes infecting the neighborhood. This city is for winners, Ebony. And this house, he gestured vaguely toward the general direction of my parents' home, does not house failures. Go find a shelter or something. He revved his engine and sped off, leaving me in a cloud of exhaust fumes. I watched him go, realizing that the only thing connecting me to these people was DNA, and right now, even that felt like a curse. I was truly on my own. I moved into a studio apartment in South Atlanta that smelled of mildew and despair. The building was a crumbling brick structure sandwiched between a liquor store and a boarded-up laundromat. The landlord demanded cash up front and did not ask for a credit check, which was fortunate because my credit was currently in free fall. My new neighbors were ghosts, people living on the margins just trying to survive another day. The first night I lay on a mattress I had dragged in from the curb, listening to the symphony of the streets. Sirens wailed incessantly, arguments erupted and faded, and then the sound that made my blood freeze. Pop, pop, pop. Gunshots. Close, too close. I rolled off the mattress and curled into a ball on the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was my reality now. I was a refugee in my own city, hiding from stray bullets in a room that did not even have a lock on the bathroom door. Hunger became a constant companion. My bank account was still frozen and the $20 was long gone. I looked at the Louis Vuitton bag sitting in the corner, one of the few luxury items I had managed to save. It used to represent my success, my status. Now it was just a leather sack filled with memories I could not eat. I took it to a pawn shop 3 blocks away, clutching it to my chest like a shield. The man behind the glass partition looked at the bag, then at my tired face, with a mixture of suspicion and boredom. He offered me $200, a fraction of its value. I did not haggle. I took the crumpled bills and walked straight to the corner store. I bought a case of instant noodles, a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter. That night I ate the noodles raw because the gas had not been turned on yet. It tasted like salt and failure. I tried to fight my way back. I spent my days at the public library using their free internet to apply for jobs. Any jobs. Sales representative, account manager, entry-level clerk. My resume was stellar on paper. 10 years of exceeding targets, awards, commendations. I got interviews. I put on my one remaining suit, steam cleaned it in the shower, and walked into corporate offices with my head held high, trying to project the confidence I had lost. The interviews always started well. They were impressed by my track record. They liked my energy. But then came the background check. Or worse, the quick Google search during the meeting. I watched the hiring manager's face change. The smile would vanish, replaced by a look of recognition and disgust. Wait, are you the woman from that viral video? The one who cursed out the medical board? I tried to explain. It was a hack. It was my sister. It was not real. But it did not matter. In corporate America, perception is reality. You are a liability, Ms. Adams. We cannot have that kind of energy here. I was blacklisted. My sister had not just played a prank. She had branded me with a scarlet letter that no amount of explaining could wash away. I walked back to my rat-infested apartment knowing that as long as my name was attached to that video, I was unemployable. I was trapped. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment staring at the water stains spreading across the ceiling when my phone pinged. I ignored it at first, assuming it was another debt collector or a rejection email. But then it pinged again. And again. I reached for it sluggishly, my hand heavy with exhaustion. It was an email notification, not from a job application but directly to my personal inbox. The sender was unfamiliar. HR at Biotech Global. My heart skipped a beat. Biotech Global was the fiercest competitor of my former company. They were the sharks of the pharmaceutical world, aggressive, innovative, and ruthless. I opened the email expecting spam or maybe a cruel joke. Instead, I found a message that made the breath catch in my throat. The subject line was simple. We know. I clicked on the body of the email. Ms. Adams, it began. We have been following your situation with great interest. Our cybersecurity team analyzed the audio from your termination incident. We know it was a deepfake. We know you were sabotaged. But more importantly, we know your numbers. You closed deals that our best salespeople could not touch. You have a killer instinct that has been wasted on a company that did not appreciate you. We do not care about viral videos or public relations nightmares. We care about results. We are launching a new division focused on government contracts. It is a war zone out there, and we need a general. We need a wolf who knows how to bite back. If you are ready to stop hiding and start hunting, come to our headquarters tomorrow at 9 a.m. Ask for Julian Thorne. I read the email 3 times, my vision blurring with fresh tears. But these were not tears of despair. They were tears of validation. Someone saw me. Someone saw past the scandal and the noise and saw the value I brought to the table. They knew I was innocent. And they wanted me not despite my reputation, but because of the fire that had been ignited within me. I stood up, my legs trembling slightly. I walked to the small, cracked mirror hanging over the sink and looked at myself. My hair was disheveled, my eyes were sunken, and my skin looked gray in the harsh fluorescent light. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something else. A spark. A flicker of the woman I used to be. No, not the woman I used to be. The woman I was becoming. A woman who had survived the fire and was now ready to burn down the world that had tried to destroy her. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. I went to the closet and pulled out my last remaining suit, the navy blue power suit I had saved for a special occasion. I hung it on the shower rod and turned on the hot water, letting the steam smooth out the wrinkles. Tomorrow I would not walk into that meeting as a victim. I would walk in as a predator. I would take this opportunity, and I would use it to build an empire so high that my family would have to strain their necks just to see the soles of my shoes. The game had changed, and this time I was playing to win. I walked into the headquarters of Biotech Global wearing my navy suit-like armor. The building was a monolith of steel and glass designed to intimidate, but I was done being intimidated. I navigated the security checkpoints with the muscle memory of my past life, my chin held high despite the whispers I imagined following me. Julian Thorne's office was on the top floor, a sterile expanse of white marble and panoramic views of the city I intended to conquer. He was waiting for me standing by the window, a man who radiated power and impatience. He turned as I entered, his eyes scanning me, not with pity, but with calculation. He did not offer me coffee or small talk. He simply pointed to a chair and asked one question. Why should I hire a liability? I did not sit. Instead, I walked to the whiteboard wall and picked up a marker. I did not talk about my feelings or my innocence. I talked about blood. I mapped out the weaknesses of my former company, the gaps in their supply chain, the clients they had neglected, and the government contracts they were too arrogant to pursue. I outlined a scorched earth strategy that would not just compete with them, but eviscerate their market share in the Southeast region within 6 months. I drew lines of attack that were aggressive, borderline predatory, and undeniably brilliant. When I finished, I capped the marker and turned to face him. You should hire me because I am starving, Mr. Thorne. And a starving wolf hunts harder than a well-fed dog. Thorne stared at the board for a long moment, silence stretching in the room. Then a slow shark-like smile spread across his face. He sat down at his desk and interlaced his fingers. I like your anger, Ms. Adams. It is useful. But you are damaged goods. I cannot offer you a standard executive package. I will give you a base salary that barely covers rent in this city. You will survive, but you will not be comfortable. However, I will give you an uncapped commission structure on every government contract you close. You eat what you kill. If you fail, you starve. If you succeed, you will be wealthier than you ever imagined. Do we have a deal? I did not hesitate. I shook his hand, his grip firm and cold. Deal. The next 3 months were a blur of caffeine and adrenaline. I stopped living and started existing purely for the kill. I worked 18 hours a day, arriving before the janitors, and leaving long after the city lights had dimmed. I turned my small cubicle into a command center. I relentlessly pursued the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the state medical board's contacts that my old company had deemed too difficult to crack. I used every connection, every loophole, and every ounce of charm I possessed. I did not see my friends. I did not date. I barely slept. I was a machine fueled by the memory of my sister's laughter and my father's dismissal. And then it happened. The breakthrough. I landed a $12 million contract with the State Defense Network, a deal that no one saw coming. It was the largest single sale in the division's history. I signed the paperwork with a steady hand, feeling the shift in the atmosphere. I was no longer the disgraced executive, I was the rainmaker, and the rain was about to turn into a flood. 3 months later, the notification hit my phone on a humid Tuesday morning. It was a direct deposit alert from Biotech Global. The number on the screen was staggering: $200,000. It was my first quarterly commission check, a payout from the defense contracts I had secured with my own two hands. I sat on the edge of my mattress in my cramped South Atlanta apartment and stared at the digits until they blurred. For the first time in 90 days, I could breathe without the crushing weight of poverty pressing down on my chest. I looked around the room at the peeling paint and the water stains on the ceiling. I could have moved out that very hour. I could have walked into a luxury dealership and bought a brand new car with cash to replace the one my family had stolen. I could have bought a wardrobe of designer clothes to replace what I had sold to survive. But I did not spend a dime. I did not move. I did not upgrade my lifestyle. The poverty I had endured had stripped away my vanity and replaced it with cold, hard discipline. I realized that money was not just for comfort. Money was ammunition, and I needed to stockpile every bullet I could get. I transferred the funds into a high-yield savings account, and then I made a phone call. I did not call a realtor. I called a private investigator named Marcus, who specialized in forensic accounting and asset tracing. He was expensive, discreet, and ruthless, the kind of professional who usually worked for divorce lawyers representing billionaires. I met him in a quiet diner, far away from the prying eyes of my old social circle. I slid a manila envelope across the table containing $5,000 in cash as a retainer. "I want a full financial autopsy on Bradley and Chantel Montgomery," I told him, my voice steady. "I want to know every bank account, every credit card, every loan, and every debt. I want to know where their money comes from, and more importantly, where it is going. I want to know who actually owns the penthouse they claim to have bought." Marcus did not ask why. He simply counted the money, nodded, and pocketed the envelope. He had seen the type before. Men like Brad, who flashed Rolexes and drove leased sports cars, usually had financial skeletons dancing in their closets. I knew Brad was a fraud. I had always suspected it. The vague explanations about his investments, the way he sweated when the bill came at dinner, even though he always insisted on paying, the desperation in his eyes when he demanded my car keys. He was not a tycoon building generational wealth. He was a gambler trying to outrun the house. But suspicion was not enough. I needed proof. I needed documents. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went, so that when I finally pulled the trigger, there would be no room for them to spin a new lie. I walked back to my car feeling a dark sense of satisfaction. My family thought I was destitute. They thought I was broken. They had no idea that I was not just surviving, I was watching. And I was preparing to expose every single one of their secrets. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat across from me in the same diner, pushing a thick dossier across the greasy table. His expression was grim, the look of a man who had stared into the abyss of human stupidity and found it bottomless. "You were right," he said, his voice low. "Your brother-in-law is not an investor, he is an illusionist." I opened the file. The first page was a summary of Brad's assets, or rather the lack thereof. The numbers were all in the red: negative balances, overdraft fees, maxed-out credit lines. But that was just the surface. Marcus tapped a section labeled Income Source. "He does not have a real job," Marcus explained. "He runs a classic Ponzi scheme targeting elderly retirees in Florida. He promises them 20% returns on real estate developments that do not exist. He uses the money from new investors to pay off the old ones and skim a fat salary for himself. But the well is drying up. He is bleeding cash. I flipped through the pages, seeing the trail of deception. Fake LLCs, forged bank statements. It was a house of cards waiting for a stiff breeze. But the next revelation was even darker. Marcus pointed to a series of large cash withdrawals and wire transfers to an account linked to a known gambling syndicate. He is not just failing Ebony, he is in trouble. Deep trouble. He borrowed $500,000 from a loan shark syndicate in Miami to cover a payout gap last month. He missed the first repayment deadline yesterday. These are not the kind of people who send stern letters. They send guys with baseball bats. I closed the folder, my heart racing. Brad was not just broke, he was a dead man walking. And my family, my parents who worshipped the ground he walked on, had no idea. They thought he was their golden ticket. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. There was Chantel posting a story from a high-end boutique. She was holding a bright orange Hermes Birkin bag, posing with a duck face. New baby, she had captioned it with a diamond emoji. Hubby spoils me. I zoomed in on the stitching. It was crooked. The hardware was too shiny. It was a fake. A high-quality fake, but a fake nonetheless. Just like her life. She was preening for the internet, holding a counterfeit bag paid for with stolen money while her husband was one kneecap away from the hospital. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was exactly the leverage I needed. Chantel had no idea she was sleeping next to a ticking time bomb. She was too busy chasing likes to notice the fuse burning down. I looked at Marcus. Does anyone else know? He shook his head. Just you, me, and the guys he owes money to. And now you hold the detonator. I smiled, a cold, hard expression that felt foreign on my face. I did not just hold the detonator. I own the demolition company. I slid another envelope of cash to Marcus. Keep digging, I said. I want to know when the bomb is set to go off. Because I want a front row seat when it does. I was sitting in my cramped apartment processing the bomb Marcus had just dropped on me when my phone buzzed again with a priority alert from him. It was a listing notification from a luxury real estate site. The subject line read, "Distressed Asset Sale, Midtown Penthouse." I clicked the link and my jaw tightened. It was the penthouse. The sprawling glass-walled apartment in the sky that Brad and Chantel had been flaunting on Instagram for 2 years. The one they claimed they had bought with cash from Brad's crypto windfalls. The listing told a very different story. It was being sold by a private equity firm that was liquidating its residential portfolio. And it was priced to move, fast. The description mentioned that the unit was currently occupied by tenants on a month-to-month lease. Tenants. Not owners, not investors. Tenants. They were living in a glass castle they did not own, paying rent with money Brad was stealing from grandmothers in Florida. It was almost too perfect. I called the listing agent immediately using a burner phone and introducing myself as the representative of a private investment trust. I did not use my name. I used the name of the LLC I had formed the day I got my first commission check. Nemesis Ventures. It sounded corporate enough to be boring, but personal enough to make me smile every time I signed a document. I want the unit, I told the agent, my voice crisp and professional. Cash offer, full asking price, no inspection. Can we close in 48 hours? The agent sounded like he might faint from joy. In this market, cash was king, and a no contingency offer was a royal flush. He stammered his agreement, promising to expedite the paperwork. I hung up and leaned back against the peeling wall of my studio. The irony was delicious. I was living in a slum eating discount tuna while buying a $3 million penthouse. But this was not about luxury. It was about control. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room at a title company across town wearing dark glasses and a hat just in case. I signed the mountains of paperwork with a steady hand. The deed transferred ownership from the equity firm to my LLC. The property management agreement was updated. The tenant information was handed over. I flipped through the lease file. There it was. Bradley Montgomery and Chantel Adams. Their rent was astronomical, and according to the ledger, they were consistently late. I ran my finger over their signatures. They had no idea that the ground had just shifted beneath their feet. They thought they were living the high life secure in their tower. They did not know that the sister they had discarded, the woman they called a failure, now owned the very floorboards they walked on. I was not just their enemy anymore. I was their landlord, and rent was due. Thanksgiving arrived with a biting chill in the air that matched the reception I knew awaited me. I pulled my rusted Honda Civic into the driveway of my parents' estate, parking it conspicuously between Brad's leased Range Rover and my father's pristine Jaguar. The car was a prop, a theatrical device I had purchased for $2,000 to sell the narrative of my destitution. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was wearing a black turtleneck and matching trousers. To my family, who equated logos with wealth, I looked like I was wearing a uniform. They would not recognize the hand-stitched Italian silk or the fact that this simple outfit cost more than Chantel's wedding dress. That was the point. Wealth whispers, while debt screams, and my family was deafening. I walked up the front steps, bracing myself. The door swung open before I could knock. It was Chantel. She was wearing a neon pink dress covered in designer monograms that clashed violently with her spray tan. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other, likely recording content for her followers. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer that she probably thought looked sophisticated. "Oh my God, Ebony, you actually came," she said, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "And you drove that thing. I thought the gardener was here early." I stepped past her into the foyer, the warmth of the house hitting my face. "Happy Thanksgiving, Chantel," I said quietly. She followed me, laughing. "Seriously though, are you okay? You look like you are heading to a funeral for a hamster? Or are you applying for a job as the catering staff? Because if you are here to serve appetizers, you should have used the side entrance. The guests are going to think we hired a new maid." Brad emerged from the living room, a turkey leg already in his hand. He laughed, spraying crumbs onto the floor. "Good one, babe. She does look like the help." "Hey, Ebony, if you need cash that badly, I have got a few shirts that need ironing. I pay $10 an hour. That is better than zero, right?" My parents were sitting by the fire, pretending not to hear the abuse, or perhaps enjoying it. My mother, Viola, glanced at me over her reading glasses. Her eyes swept over my plain black clothes with disappointment. "Ebony," she sighed. "We have guests coming. Could you not have made an effort? You look so defeated." I forced a tight smile. "I am comfortable, Mom." "Comfort does not pay the bills, sweetheart," she retorted. "Appearances matter. Look at your sister. She looks like success." I looked at Chantel, who was posing in the hallway mirror, adjusting her fake lashes. She looked like a billboard for insecurity. I looked at Brad, who was wiping grease on his pants. He looked like a ticking time bomb. And then I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. I saw a woman who owned the roof over their heads. I saw a woman who could buy and sell everyone in this room before dessert was served. "I am fine, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I am exactly where I need to be." They interpreted my calm as resignation. They thought I was broken. They had no idea I was just biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Dinner ended with the heavy thud of my father placing his fork on the table. It was the signal for the women to clear the plates, a tradition in the Adams household that usually meant my mother and Chantel gossiping in the kitchen while I organized the leftovers. But today the rules had changed. Viola stood up and smoothed her apron, looking at me with a gaze that could strip paint. "Ebony, you handle the cleanup," she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The maid is off for the holiday, and since you did not contribute a dime to this meal, the least you can do is wash the dishes. Chantel, you come sit with us in the living room. You need to rest your hands. You have been working so hard on your content." I looked at the mountain of dirty china, the crystal wine glasses stained with expensive Merlot, and the grease congealing on the serving platters. It was a punishment, plain and simple. A reminder of my place in the new hierarchy. I stood up silently and began stacking plates. I did not argue. I did not roll my eyes. I simply carried the heavy load into the kitchen, the sounds of the football game already blaring from the 60-inch television in the next room. From my vantage point at the sink, my hands deep in scalding soapy water, I had a clear view of the living room. They were arranged like a royal court. Desmond sat in his recliner, a glass of cognac in his hand, his eyes fixed on Brad with an expression of pure adoration. Brad was holding court, gesturing wildly with a cigar he had not bothered to ask permission to light. "You guys have to get in on this new coin," Brad was saying, his voice booming over the commentators on the TV. "It is called Titan X. I have inside information from a developer in Silicon Valley. We are talking about a 10 times return in 3 months. Conservative estimate. I just moved 50 grand from the liquidity pool into this project. It is going to pay for the new boat by Christmas." Desmond nodded enthusiastically, hanging on every word of the man who was actively stealing his retirement fund. "That is incredible, Brad," my father said, shaking his head in wonder. "You really have a mind for the market. It is impressive to see a young man who knows how to make his money work for him." He turned his head slightly, his gaze landing on me through the open archway. His expression shifted instantly from admiration to disgust. "Unlike some people who squander their education and end up scrubbing plates at 32, why can you not be more like him, Ebony? He is building an empire while you are starting over from zero." I scrubbed a roasting pan harder, the steel wool biting into my skin. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Brad was not investing in Titan X. He was funneling money into an offshore account to pay off a gambling debt in Macau. I knew this because Marcus had sent me the wire transfer receipts that morning. My father was looking at a con artist and seeing a genius while looking at his multimillionaire daughter and seeing a servant. I rinsed the pan and set it in the drying rack, the hot water doing nothing to thaw the cold resolve in my chest. Let them watch the game. Let them worship the false idol. I would wash the dishes. I would play the role of the dutiful broken daughter. Because every plate I scrubbed, every insult I swallowed, was just another line item on the invoice I would be presenting them very soon. And unlike Brad's crypto scheme, my returns were guaranteed. I dried my hands on a rough kitchen towel and stepped into the hallway, the roar of the football game providing a convenient cover for my movements. I intended to grab my coat and leave, but a hushed, urgent conversation drifting from my father's study stopped me cold. The door was cracked open just an inch, a sliver of yellow light spilling onto the hardwood floor. I crept closer, my breath shallow, and peered through the gap. Brad was leaning over the mahogany desk, a stack of legal documents spread out before him. My parents, Desmond and Viola, sat opposite him, looking small and confused. Brad was tapping a pen against a signature line, his voice smooth and reassuring, the tone of a snake charmer soothing a basket of cobras. "It is just a standard asset protection protocol," Brad said, flashing that white predatory smile. "Think of it like a comprehensive insurance wrapper. It locks in the equity of the house, so the market volatility cannot touch it. We are just moving the title into a holding trust for safekeeping, while the Titan X returns compound. You are basically insuring your legacy." My father frowned, adjusting his glasses. "It seems like a lot of paperwork for insurance, Brad, and this clause here about power of attorney regarding real property. Are you sure this is necessary?" Brad laughed, a dismissive sound that made my skin crawl. "That is just legalese, Dad. The lawyers have to put that in there." "Trust me. Do you want to miss out on the next bull run because you were scared of a little paperwork? I am trying to double your retirement here." I squinted at the document visible through the crack. It was not insurance. It was a deed of trust and a limited power of attorney, granting Brad full authority to encumber the property. He was not protecting the house. He was mortgaging it. He was leveraging the only asset my parents had left to secure a high-risk loan likely to pay off the sharks circling him. My instinct was to kick the door open. I wanted to scream, to tear the papers from his hands, to shake my parents and scream that they were signing their death warrant. I took a step forward, my hand reaching for the doorknob. This was still my childhood home. These were still the people who raised me. Then I stopped. I remembered the way my mother looked at me in the kitchen, like I was a stain on her perfect life. I remembered my father watching Brad drive away with my car keys, telling me to learn humility. I remembered the cold pavement of the bus stop and the taste of raw noodles in the dark. They had chosen this. They had chosen the lie over the truth, the con artist over the daughter. If I saved them now, they would not thank me. They would accuse me of being jealous, of trying to sabotage Brad's genius. They had to learn, and the lesson had to be absolute. I pulled my phone from my pocket and silently opened the camera app. I steadied my hand against the doorframe and hit record. I zoomed in as my father picked up the pen. I captured the hesitation in my mother's eyes and the way Brad nodded encouragingly, like a parent coaxing a child. I recorded the pen touching the paper. The scratch of the signature was audible in the silence of the room. I recorded my mother signing next. It was done. They had just handed over their legacy to a drowning man. I stopped the recording and saved the file to 3 different cloud drives. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding a rhythm of cold, hard justice. I did not save them. I let them drown. Because soon I would be the one buying the ocean. The collapse of Brad's financial house of cards was not a slow burn. It was a controlled demolition that I watched from the safety of my penthouse office. 90 days after my parents signed their lives away, the Titan X coin rug pulled. The value dropped to 0 in seconds, taking my parents' equity and Brad's imaginary fortune with it. The payments to the bank stopped immediately. Brad intercepted the first notice of default. He probably burned the second one, but he could not hide the reality from the algorithm. My foreclosure alerts pinged on a rainy Tuesday morning, notifying me that the property at Cascade Road was entering pre-foreclosure status. The bank was preparing to seize the asset to recoup their losses. They viewed my childhood home as a toxic asset, a bad debt on a balance sheet that they needed to liquidate. I did not call my parents to warn them. I called my lawyer. We set up a meeting with the bank's distressed asset division. I walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my mother's entire wardrobe. I did not introduce myself as Ebony Adams, the daughter who was kicked out. I was the CEO of Nemesis Ventures, an aggressive acquisition firm looking to expand its real estate portfolio. The bank officers were tired and desperate to offload the non-performing loan. They did not care about the sentimental value of the brick and mortar. They just wanted the red ink off their ledger. I made an offer to purchase the promissory note and the mortgage assignment. It was an aggressive lowball offer, cents on the dollar. I pointed out the declining market values in the neighborhood and the potential legal headaches of evicting elderly occupants. The bank executives whispered among themselves for 5 minutes before sliding the contract across the polished mahogany table. They accepted. I picked up my pen, the same heavy fountain pen I used to sign million-dollar government contracts, and signed my name. With that ink drying on the page, the dynamic of my universe shifted irrevocably. The bank was no longer the entity threatening to take my parents home. I was. I now held the lien. I held the power to foreclose. I held the power to evict. The house where I learned to walk. The house where my mother told me I was a disappointment, the house where my father chose a con artist over his own flesh and blood now belonged to me. Or rather, it belonged to my mercy. And as I looked at the deed of trust now legally assigned to my company, I realized that mercy was a currency my family had never deposited into my account. I slid the documents into my briefcase and walked out into the city. The rain felt cleansing. I was not just a successful businesswoman anymore. I was the grim reaper of the Addams family legacy, and I had just sharpened my scythe. 6 months later, the world looked very different from the vantage point of a private jet terminal. I stood in the kiosk of the airport newsstand adjusting my sunglasses. I was not looking for gum or travel pillows. I was looking for confirmation. And there it was, stacked in the front row right at eye level. The latest issue of Forbes magazine, the special edition dedicated to self-made entrepreneurs. The woman on the cover was striking. She wore a tailored white suit that contrasted sharply with her dark skin. Her hair was sleek, her gaze direct and unyielding. She looked like she could buy the world and sell it for parts. It was me. I picked up a copy, feeling the glossy weight of it in my hands. The headline was bold, typed in gold letters that caught the harsh airport lighting. From outcast to empire. How Ebony Adams turned a public scandal into a $10 million fortune. Below it, a smaller byline read, "The pharmaceutical queen who eats wolves for breakfast." It was surreal. 6 months ago, I was eating raw noodles in the dark, terrified of stray bullets. Now, I was the face of American resilience. I opened the magazine to the center spread. The article detailed my rise, my strategy, my relentless pursuit of government contracts. It mentioned Nemesis Ventures, my real estate holdings, my acquisition of distressed assets. It did not name my family explicitly, but it painted a picture of a woman who had been pushed off a cliff and learned to fly on the way down. The cashier, a young woman with bright purple braids, gasped when I placed the magazine on the counter along with a bottle of water. She looked from the cover to my face and back again. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That is you. That is actually you." I remember the video, the one with the prank call. Everyone said you were finished. I smiled, a genuine expression that reached my eyes. "They were wrong," I said simply. I paid with my black card, the metal clinking softly against the counter. "Keep the change." I walked out of the store and toward the tarmac where my chartered flight waited. This magazine was not just a vanity project. It was a declaration of war. It was being distributed nationwide today. It would be in every airport, every bookstore, every grocery checkout line, and every high-end salon in Atlanta. It would be unavoidable. My family lived for appearances. They lived for the approval of strangers and the validation of their social circle. And now the entire country was about to read about the daughter they threw away. The daughter who was now worth more than their entire bloodline combined. I checked my watch. It was 10 in the morning. Chantel had her weekly appointment at the Buckhead Spa in 30 minutes. She always read the magazines in the waiting room while her feet soaked. I imagined the moment she would reach for the glossy cover expecting to see a celebrity, and instead seeing the sister she thought she had destroyed. The countdown had ended. The explosion was imminent. And I was already 30,000 feet in the air watching the world get smaller beneath me. Chantel was reclining in the most expensive pedicure chair at the Serenity Spa in Buckhead. She was complaining loudly to her nail technician about the stress of being an influencer and how hard it was to maintain her lifestyle. She did not mention that her credit card had been declined twice that morning, or that Brad was currently hyperventilating in the bathroom of our parents' house. She just wanted to be pampered. The technician, trying to be polite, handed her a glossy magazine from the rack. "You might like this," she said. "It is the special edition on self-made women. It just came in this morning." Chantel took it carelessly, barely glancing at the cover as she reached for her mimosa. Then she froze. The glass stopped halfway to her mouth. She blinked once, twice, thinking it was a hallucination brought on by stress and cheap champagne. But the image did not change. It was me, wearing a white suit, looking like I owned the skyline behind me. Her hand went slack. Her iPhone, the latest model she could not afford, slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, but Chantel did not even look down. She grabbed the magazine with both hands, bringing it so close to her face that her nose touched the glossy paper. "Ebony," she whispered. "It is Ebony." Her voice rose to a shrill shriek that made the other patrons turn around. "This is my sister! This is my sister!" She frantically tapped on her broken phone screen, ignoring the shards of glass cutting her thumb. She typed my name into Google. The search results loaded instantly. The first hit was the Forbes article. The second was a profile on Nemesis Ventures. The third was a net worth estimation site. $10 million. The numbers seemed to pulsate on the screen. Chantel stared at it. Her eyes bulged. 10 million. She read the article, skimming over the parts about hard work and strategy and focusing entirely on the financial figures: real estate holdings, government contracts, liquid assets. A wave of pure hot jealousy washed over her. It was unfair. It was wrong. She was the star. She was the one who was supposed to be famous and rich. I was just the boring big sister, the one she had pranked into oblivion. How dare I succeed? How dare I have millions while she was dodging eviction notices? She felt a scream building in her throat, a tantrum that would have gotten her banned from the spa. But then the jealousy shifted. It twisted and morphed into something cold and calculating. She looked at the number again. $10 million. That was enough to fix everything. It was enough to pay off Brad's loan sharks. It was enough to buy the penthouse for real. It was enough to fund the lifestyle she deserved. Her expression changed. The shock vanished, replaced by a greedy, predatory smirk. She did not see a sister who had overcome adversity. She saw a winning lottery ticket that she just needed to cash. She picked up her phone, ignoring the broken screen, and opened the family group chat. She typed in all caps, her thumbs flying. "Emergency meeting now. You will not believe what Ebony has been hiding. We are rich." She stood up, water dripping from her feet onto the floor, and walked out without paying, leaving the magazine open on the chair as the blueprint for her salvation. Chantel burst through the front door of my parents' estate like a hurricane in knockoff designer heels. She was breathless, sweating, and clutching the Forbes magazine like it was a holy relic. "Mom, Dad, get in here now!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Desmond and Viola rushed from the kitchen, alarmed by the panic in their golden child's voice. Brad stumbled out of the study, looking pale and hungover. "What is it?" Viola asked, reaching for her daughter. "Are you hurt? Did someone attack you?" Chantel slammed the magazine onto the coffee table, opening it to my centerfold. "Look," she gasped, pointing at the picture. "Look at Ebony." Desmond picked up the magazine, adjusting his glasses. He read the headline out loud, his voice trembling. $10 million. Pharmaceutical queen. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This cannot be right. Ebony is destitute. She drives a rust bucket. She washes our dishes." Viola snatched the magazine, scanning the article. Her face went from confusion to a strange, twisted sort of pride mixed with fury. "She lied to us," Viola hissed. "She has been playing us this whole time. She has millions and she let us think she was starving. She let us worry about her. How dare she make a mockery of this family?" Brad grabbed the magazine from Viola. He did not care about the deception or the family honor. He only saw the zeros. 10 million, he muttered, a manic grin spreading across his face. $10 million. Do you know what this means? This is it. This is the miracle we prayed for. He looked at Chantel and my parents, his eyes wild with desperation. "The sharks in Miami gave me until Friday before they start breaking bones. This money can fix everything. It can pay off the debt. It can buy the penthouse back. It can fund the next investment. We are saved." "But she hates us," Chantel whined, dropping onto the sofa. "She cut us off. She is not going to just give us money." She smiled when she walked out on Thanksgiving. She enjoyed seeing us struggle. Brad shook his head, pacing the room. "No, she won't give it if we ask. We have to make her want to give it. We have to remind her who she is. She isn't Adams. She craves your approval, Desmond. She wants to be the savior. She has always tried to buy her way into this family with good grades and promotions. This is no different." Viola nodded slowly, the gears in her mind turning. Brad is right. She has always been desperate for our validation. That is her weakness. We need to stop the tough love act. We need to welcome her back into the fold. We need to kill her with kindness. We will invite her to dinner. Viola plotted, her voice taking on a sickly sweet tone. A real dinner, not leftovers. I will cook her favorite meal. We will tell her how proud we are. We will apologize just enough to lower her defenses. Then, once she feels like part of the family again, we will present the problems. Brad, your heart condition needs to flare up. Chantel, you need a stable home for your mental health. We will make it about saving the family honor. She will pay. She always pays to belong. They smiled at each other, united by greed and delusion, unaware that they were plotting against a ghost who had already haunted their house. I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, reviewing the acquisition papers for the banknote on my parents' house, when my personal cell phone rang. It was a number I had deliberately unblocked only an hour prior, anticipating this exact moment. The screen flashed Mom. I stared at it for a second, letting it ring. Beside me, my executive assistant Maya looked up from her tablet, her eyebrows raised. She knew the history. She knew about the eviction, the car, the noodles. I held a finger to my lips and tapped the speaker icon. "Ebony, baby, is that you?" The voice that filled the room was unrecognizable. It was not the cold, imperious tone of Viola Adams, the woman who had ordered me to wash dishes while my family mocked me. This voice was dripping with honey and molasses. It was the voice she used for church elders and wealthy neighbors. It was a performance. I leaned back in my leather chair, my face an impassive mask. "I am here, Mother," I said, my voice neutral. "Oh, thank God. We have been so worried about you, sweetheart. It has been too long. The silence in this big old house is just unbearable without our eldest girl." Viola paused for effect, waiting for me to apologize or break down. When I said nothing, she plowed ahead with the script they had undoubtedly rehearsed. "Your father and I were just talking about how much we miss you. We realized we might have been a little strict before, but it was only because we want the best for you. You know that, right? We love you so much." Maya covered her mouth to stifle a gasp of disbelief. The audacity was breathtaking. They had kicked me out on the street, but now that they smelled money, I was suddenly their beloved daughter again. Viola played her ace card. "I am making your favorite this weekend, Ebony. My seafood gumbo with the extra crab legs and the spicy sausage just the way you like it. And peach cobbler for dessert. I want you to come home for dinner on Sunday. Just a nice, quiet family meal. We can catch up. We can start over." I looked at Maya and smirked, a cold, humorless expression that frightened most of my competitors. My mother was trying to lure me back with food and empty words, thinking I was still the desperate girl seeking validation. She had no idea she was inviting the executioner to the table. I leaned closer to the phone. "That sounds delicious, Mom," I said, injecting a note of feigned gratitude into my voice. "I would love to come. I have been working very hard lately, and a home-cooked meal sounds perfect." Viola let out a sigh of relief that sounded like a tire deflating. "Oh, wonderful. Sunday at 6. Do not be late, baby. We have so much to celebrate." I hung up the phone, and the silence returned to the office. Maya looked at me, her eyes wide. "You are actually going?" she asked. "After everything they did?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city streets far below. "I am going, Maya. But I am not going for the gumbo. They want a family reunion, so I am going to give them one they will never forget." I turned back to her, my eyes hard. "Prepare the files, Maya, and call the dealership. I need a car that screams I own you. If they want a show, I am going to give them a blockbuster." I pulled the midnight blue Rolls-Royce Ghost into the driveway of my parents' estate at exactly 6 o'clock. The gravel crunched satisfyingly beneath the tires of a car that cost more than the mortgage on this entire property. I parked right in the center of the driveway, blocking the path to the garage, taking the spot that was usually reserved for my father. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the hermetically sealed silence of the cabin, smelling the rich leather and the scent of my own expensive perfume. Through the tinted windshield, I could see the front door of the house fly open. They had been watching for me. They had probably been glued to the window since 5:30, waiting for their salvation to arrive. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. Gone was the woman in the black turtleneck who had washed dishes in silence. Tonight I was wearing the bespoke white suit from Alexander McQueen, tailored to within an inch of its life. My hair was pulled back in a severe, sleek bun, and around my neck hung a diamond pendant that caught the fading sunlight. I looked like money. I looked like power. I took a deep breath, summoned the cold resolve that had gotten me through the last 6 months, and opened the door. My father, Desmond, was the first one down the steps. This was a man who used to complain if I parked my old sedan too close to his Jaguar. Now he was practically jogging to greet me, a wide, anxious smile plastered across his face. "Ebony, sweetheart," he called out, reaching for my hand as I stepped out of the car. "Look at you. You look absolutely magnificent." He pulled me into a hug that felt stiff and desperate, patting my back a little too hard. I let him embrace me, my arms remaining loose at my sides. He pulled back and looked at the car, his eyes wide with a mixture of greed and awe. "Is this yours?" "It is incredible. A ghost, right? I always said you had excellent taste." I adjusted my jacket, ensuring my Rolex was visible. "It is a company car, Dad," I lied smoothly, though technically it belonged to my LLC, so it was not really a lie. "The board insisted I have something safe for travel." Desmond nodded enthusiastically, as if he understood what it was like to have a board of directors concerned for his safety. "Of course, safety is paramount. Come inside, your mother is beside herself." We walked up the steps and into the foyer, where the rest of the welcoming committee was waiting. Viola was standing by the entrance to the dining room, wearing her Sunday best, holding a linen napkin like a prop. Her eyes raked over my outfit, calculating the cost of every thread. "Ebony baby," she cooed, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "You look thin. Have you been eating? I have been so worried about you working so hard." I smiled, a tight expression that did not reach my eyes. "I have been busy, Mom." Success takes a lot of energy. Brad and Chantel were standing behind her, looking like two children who had been told to behave or else. Chantel was wearing a modest dress that looked out of character for her, trying to play the role of the sweet little sister. Brad was holding a bottle of wine, his knuckles white around the neck. "Hey, Ebony," Chantel said, her voice small. "You look great." "Really?" "Thanks, Chantel," I replied, my tone cool. "You look nice too. Less flashy than usual." She flinched but kept the smile frozen on her face. Come sit, come sit." Viola ushered us into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates that were usually reserved for Easter and Christmas. There were fresh flowers in the center, a massive arrangement of lilies that smelled overwhelming. Viola guided me to the chair at the right hand of my father, the seat of honor. Desmond rushed to pull the chair out for me, waiting for me to sit before pushing it in gently. It was a gesture of respect he had never shown me in 32 years. I sat down, placing my clutch on the table. It was a limited edition Chanel worth $5,000. I saw Chantel's eyes dart to it, immediately filled with longing and envy. Brad moved around the table with the wine bottle. It was a vintage Cabernet, not the cheap stuff he usually drank. "Can I pour you a glass, Ebony?" he asked, his voice solicitous, almost servant-like. "I would love one, Brad," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "But not too full. I have a big day tomorrow." He nodded quickly, pouring the wine with a shaking hand, careful not to spill a drop on the tablecloth. "Of course. Big business. We understand." Viola emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming tureen of gumbo. The smell of seafood and spices filled the room, usually a scent that brought me comfort, but tonight it just smelled like manipulation. She ladled a massive portion into my bowl, making sure to give me the biggest crab legs and the most shrimp. "Eat up, baby," she said, placing the bowl in front of me. "I made it just the way you like it, extra spicy. I know how much you missed my cooking." I looked around the table. My father was beaming at me like I was his greatest achievement. My mother was hovering over me like a solicitous waitress. Brad was watching me with the nervous intensity of a man waiting for a verdict. Chantel was trying to look invisible. The dynamic had completely inverted. 6 months ago, I was the scapegoat, the failure, the one scrubbing grease off their plates. Now I was the golden goose. They were terrified of me. They were in awe of me. And they were starving for what I had. I picked up my spoon and took a slow, deliberate sip of the gumbo. It was delicious, rich, and flavorful. But it tasted like ash in my mouth, because I knew exactly what it cost. It cost my dignity. It cost my trust. It cost the illusion of a family that loved me for me. This was a transaction. They were feeding me gumbo, hoping I would feed them cash. I lowered the spoon and looked at my mother, who was watching me take the first bite with bated breath. "It is wonderful, Mom," I said, "just like I remember." The tension in the room broke. They all exhaled simultaneously, picking up their own forks and smiling. They thought they had won. They thought the gumbo had worked. They thought the prodigal daughter had returned with her checkbook open, ready to save them from their own stupidity. I took another sip of wine, hiding my smirk behind the crystal glass. Enjoy the meal, I thought, because the bill is coming and it is going to be more than you can afford. The remnants of the peach cobbler were cleared away by my mother, who moved with a nervous energy that suggested the main event was about to begin. We relocated to the living room, the same room where they had mocked my poverty just months ago. Now they sat around me like disciples waiting for a sermon. The air was thick with anticipation. Brad was the first to break character. He let out a low, pained groan and clutched his chest, his face contorting into a mask of sudden agony. He slumped forward in his chair, knocking his wineglass onto the coffee table. "Oh my God, Brad!" Chantel screamed, her performance right on cue. "Is it happening again? Is it your heart?" She rushed to his side, grabbing his hand and looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Ebony, you do not know. We did not want to burden you while you were struggling, but Brad is sick. Really sick." My father leaned forward, his face grave. "It is true, Ebony. The doctors found a congenital defect. His valves are failing. He needs a transplant, an experimental procedure that insurance refuses to cover. It is a ticking time bomb." Brad looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat on his brow. "I do not want to die, Ebony," he wheezed, his voice trembling. "I want to see my future children grow up. I want to be a good husband to your sister." "But the cost, it is impossible. They want $500,000 up front. Cash. We have tried everything. We have sold assets. We have begged. But we are short." Chantel threw herself at my feet, grabbing my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Sister, please," she begged, tears ruining her mascara. "You are the only one who can help us. You have millions now. I saw the article. 500,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. Would you really let your brother-in-law die over money you won't even miss? You are so rich, Ebony. You can save him with the stroke of a pen. Please do not be stingy. Do not let him die just to punish us." I looked at Brad, who was now taking shallow, gasping breaths. It was a masterful performance. If I did not know better, I might have called an ambulance. But I knew the truth. There was no heart defect. There was no experimental surgery. The only thing failing was his ability to pay the cartel in Miami. The $500,000 was not for a surgeon. It was for a bookie who was probably sharpening his knives right now. I looked at my parents. My mother was weeping softly into a handkerchief. My father looked at me with a mixture of hope and expectation. They believed him. Or maybe they just wanted to believe him, because the alternative was admitting they had bet their future on a criminal. They were using my success, my hard-earned fortune, to clean up their mess. They were weaponizing family duty to pay a ransom. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching Brad clutch his chest. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No pity, no fear, only a cold calculation. This was the moment. They had laid their cards on the table, a pair of jokers and a bluff. Now it was time for me to play my hand. I set my cup down with a deliberate click. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice calm, slicing through their hysteria. $500,000 to save his life. Brad stopped wheezing for a second, his eyes darting to mine. "Yes," he whispered. "That is all we need. Just $500,000. And then we can be a family again. A happy, healthy family." I stood up, smoothing the front of my white suit. The trap was set, and they had walked right into it. My silence hung in the air like smoke. I did not reach for my checkbook. I did not rush to comfort my weeping mother or my gasping brother-in-law. I just stood there watching them. And that silence terrified them more than any scream could have. It was a void they felt compelled to fill, and they filled it with the oldest weapon in their arsenal: guilt. Viola stepped forward, her eyes wet, but her jaw set with a familiar steely resolve. She reached out and touched the lapel of my white suit, rubbing the fabric between her fingers, as if testing its quality. "Ebony, look at where you are," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You stand here in your designer clothes, driving your luxury car, living in your penthouse. Do you think you got there by yourself? Do you think you just woke up one day and became a queen? No. You stand on our shoulders." She gestured around the room at the furniture, the art, the walls of the house that I now secretly owned. "Your father and I worked double shifts, so you could go to private school. We swallowed our pride in corporate offices, where they looked down on us, just so you could have a zip code that would not get your resume thrown in the trash. We prayed for you. We sacrificed for you. Your success is not just yours, Ebony. It belongs to this family. It is the harvest of the seeds we planted." Desmond nodded solemnly, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "Your mother is right, Ebony. In our community, we do not leave our own behind. That is the price of making it. You have a responsibility. Call it a tax, call it duty, call it whatever you want. But when you climb the ladder, you do not kick it away. You reach down and you pull your family up. Right now, your brother-in-law is hanging by a thread. Your sister is about to lose her husband, and you are standing there clutching your purse like a stranger." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Do not be that child, Ebony. Do not be the one who forgets where she came from the moment she sees a few zeros in her bank account. Do not let money turn your heart cold. If Brad dies because you were too stingy to write a check, that blood will be on your hands forever. You will carry that stain. Is that what you want? To be the rich, lonely woman who let her family be destroyed because she loved her money more than her blood?" The room felt suffocating. They were weaponizing our history, weaponizing the very struggle they claimed to be proud of. They were twisting the concept of community support into a shackle to bind me to their mistakes. They called it duty. I called it robbery. They wanted me to pay the black tax, but they wanted to pay it to a white con artist who had never worked a day in his life. I looked at Chantel, who was watching me with hungry, expectant eyes. I looked at Brad, who had miraculously stopped wheezing to listen to the verdict. They did not want a sister or a daughter. They wanted a savior, and they were willing to break my back to build their lifeboat. Chantel dried her eyes with a tissue and stood up, her demeanor shifting instantly from the weeping sister to the entitled brat I knew so well. She smoothed her dress and looked at me with a frightening level of sincerity. "You know, Ebony, listening to Mom and Dad, I realized something important. You are looking at this all wrong. You are acting like I ruined your life. But if you really think about it, I saved you." I stared at her, blinked once, slow and deliberate. "Saved me? You got me fired on a live stream." Chantel nodded vigorously, her gold hoop earrings swinging. "Exactly. I burned down your old life so you could build a better one. You were stuck in a rut, Ebony. You were working for a salary, making someone else rich. I pushed you off the cliff so you would be forced to fly. I was the catalyst." Without my prank, you would still be sitting in that boring office begging for a 3% raise. I made you a millionaire. She took a step closer, her eyes gleaming with greed. So really, when you think about the intellectual property of your success, I am basically a co-founder. I created the conditions for Nemesis Ventures to exist. It is only right that I get my fair share. I am not talking about a handout, Ebony. I am talking about equity. I think transferring 50% of your company shares to me would be fair. It would show that you appreciate the motivation I gave you. Plus, Brad and I can help you manage the portfolio. We have vision. Brad nodded enthusiastically from the sofa, the color returning to his face. She has a point, Ebony. It is a partnership mindset. We break you down, you build yourself up, we split the profits. It is just good business. I looked at my parents. They were not stopping her. They were nodding along, desperate for any logic that would result in a payout. They had convinced themselves that extortion was actually justice. They truly believed that my trauma was their investment strategy. The level of delusion in the room was so thick it was almost intoxicating. I felt a smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator who realizes the prey has just walked into the cage and locked the door from the inside. It was cold, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. I looked from Chantel's expectant face to Brad's sweaty desperation to my parents' hopeful eyes. So that is it, I said, my voice smooth as silk. You want to be compensated for your contribution. You want the money. You want the debts gone. You want the lifestyle you think you deserve. Yes, Chantel breathed, reaching out as if to touch me. Exactly. We just want what is fair. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up my glass of wine. I swirled the dark liquid, watching the legs run down the crystal. Okay, I said. I turned to face them, my smile widening until it felt like a blade. You made a compelling argument. If you want money, you will get money. I am going to solve every single financial problem in this room. I am going to make sure everyone gets exactly what they earned. I held my wine glass up the light, catching the expensive crystal. The room fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of Brad, who seemed to have miraculously recovered from his near-death experience. I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, whose love was conditional on my utility. My father, whose pride was built on sand. Chantel, whose vanity had been my ruin. And Brad, whose greed had been my catalyst. They were all looking at me with hungry eyes, waiting for the feast. I have made a decision, I announced, my voice ringing clear in the opulent room. You are right, family is everything. And debt is a burden that no family should have to carry. I am going to wipe the slate clean. I am going to make sure that none of you ever have to worry about a mortgage, a loan shark, or an eviction notice ever again. I am going to take care of everything. A collective gasp went around the room. Viola clapped her hands over her mouth, tears of joy springing to her eyes. Desmond let out a shuddering breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. Brad looked like he had just won the lottery, his eyes darting around the room as if counting the imaginary stacks of cash. Chantel squealed and clapped her hands like a child. I knew it, she cried. I knew you would come through. You are the best sister ever. I raised my glass higher. To family, I said, my smile tight. To resolutions. To family, they echoed in unison, clinking their glasses against mine. The sound was like a bell tolling. But I am not writing a check tonight. I continued, lowering my glass. These things take time. There are lawyers involved, asset transfers, legal documents. It has to be done properly. So here is the plan. Go home, relax, enjoy your weekend. Do not worry about the bank or the sharks or the rent. On Monday morning, check your mailboxes. You will find a package from my legal team that will settle every single outstanding issue you have. Every debt will be addressed. Every housing situation will be resolved. It will be the end of your financial worries. Permanently. Viola rushed forward and embraced me, her perfume cloying and sweet. Oh, Ebony, thank you. You are a good daughter, a good Christian woman. I knew you would do the right thing. Desmond pumped my hand, his grip firm and proud. You have made me very happy tonight, Ebony. You have restored the honor of this family. Brad gave me a thumbs up, grinning like a fool. You are a lifesaver, Eb, seriously. We are going to celebrate tonight. Drinks are on me. Well, figuratively. I extricated myself from their grasp, feeling a physical need to wash my skin. I am glad you are happy, I said, backing toward the door. Now, if you will excuse me, I have to go prepare the paperwork. Monday morning. Do not forget. Check the mail. I walked out of the house, leaving them celebrating their victory. I could hear their laughter ringing out into the night air. They were toasting to their good fortune, to their clever manipulation, to the sister they thought they had played. They had no idea that the packages arriving on Monday were not filled with money. They were filled with consequences. I got into my Rolls-Royce and drove away into the dark night, the ghost of a smile playing on my lips. They wanted a resolution. I was going to give them an ending. Monday morning broke over the estate with a sky so blue it looked artificial, fitting perfectly with the artificial joy bubbling inside the house. The Addams family was gathered in the living room at 9 in the morning. They were not dressed for work or for church. They were dressed for a celebration. Viola had popped a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon that she had been saving for a special occasion. She poured the golden liquid into crystal flutes, the bubbles fizzing softly in the hush of the room. To family, she toasted, her eyes crinkling with satisfaction. To getting what we deserve. Brad was sprawled on the chaise lounge, his tablet propped up on his knees. He was scrolling through the configuration page for a Lamborghini Aventador. He tapped the screen with a manic energy, selecting options that cost more than most people earned in a year. I think I'm going to go with the matte black finish, he announced, taking a swig of champagne. It screams power. And maybe the yellow calipers. I need something that pops when I pull up to the valet. He laughed, a sound that lacked any real warmth. The loan sharks in Miami were a distant memory now. In his mind, the check was already cashed, the debts wiped clean by his sister's guilt. Chantel sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by fashion magazines and her phone. She was deep in the archives of a luxury reseller, looking at a Himalayan Birkin bag listed for 6 figures. She zoomed in on the diamond-encrusted hardware. It is an investment, she told her mother, justifying the purchase she was about to make. Ebony would want me to have quality. She knows how important image is for my brand. Once I have this bag, my engagement numbers will skyrocket. I will be unstoppable. Desmond stood by the window, peering through the sheer curtains at the long driveway. He swirled his drink, feeling the warmth of the alcohol settle in his chest. He felt like a general who had just won a war without firing a single shot. He had managed the situation perfectly. He had applied the pressure, used the right leverage, and brought his wayward daughter to heel. She just needed a reminder of her place, he thought. Now she understands. The money is coming home where it belongs. Here he comes, Desmond shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. The mail truck. It is pulling up now. The room erupted into chaos. Brad jumped up, dropping his tablet on the sofa. Chantel scrambled to her feet, nearly tripping over her own dress. Viola set her glass down so hard liquid splashed onto the polished wood table. They rushed to the front door, huddled together like children on Christmas morning. They watched breathlessly as the uniformed mail carrier walked up the path, a bundle of mail in his hand. He looked bored, completely unaware that he was carrying the keys to their kingdom. Brad threw the door open before the man could even ring the bell. Giving it to us, he demanded, holding out his hand. The mailman blinked, startled by the aggressive welcome. He sorted through the stack and pulled out 3 thick, heavy envelopes. They were not standard letter envelopes. They were legal packets, sealed tight and stamped with the dark red logo of a prestigious law firm. Urgent. Hand deliver only. Brad grabbed them, his hands shaking. This is it, he whispered, looking at the thickness of the package. Look at the size of these. There must be deeds in here. Trust fund contracts, bank transfer authorizations. He passed one to Desmond and one to Chantel, keeping the thickest one for himself. They stood in the foyer, holding the heavy paper, feeling the weight of their victory. They looked at each other, their eyes shining with greed and relief. They thought they were holding their salvation. They had no idea they were holding their sentences. Chantel was the first to tear into her envelope. Her manicured fingernails ripped through the expensive paper with a greedy desperation that was almost animalistic. She did not bother to use a letter opener. She wanted to see the numbers. She wanted to see the deed. In her mind, she was already redecorating the new house she assumed Ebony had bought for her, or planning the shopping spree with the check that was surely inside. She pulled out the stack of documents, her eyes scanning frantically for the dollar sign, or the words, transfer of deed. But there were no dollar signs. There were no congratulations. The first page was stark white, with bold, aggressive black lettering at the top. Notice of lease termination and demand for possession. Chantel blinked, her false lashes fluttering against her cheek. She stopped breathing. She read the first paragraph, her lips moving silently as she tried to process the legalese. It was a formal eviction notice for the Midtown penthouse, the apartment she had told everyone she owned, the apartment where she filmed her lifestyle content. The document stated that the lease was being terminated immediately due to consistent non-payment of rent and breach of contract. It gave the occupants exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before the locks were changed and the sheriff was called to remove any personal property. "This is a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is a joke. Why would she send me this? She is supposed to be paying the rent, not canceling the lease." She flipped to the second page looking for the punchline, looking for the part where it said, "Just kidding, here is the money." But there was only a signature line at the bottom, the line for the property owner. It did not list the private equity firm that used to own the building. It listed a new owner, Nemesis Ventures, LLC. The room spun around her. Nemesis. Revenge. Ebony had mentioned her new holding company during dinner. She had said she was handling the asset transfers. Chantel looked at the signature below the company name. It was signed in sharp, unmistakable ink. Ebony Adams, CEO. Chantel dropped the papers as if they were on fire. They scattered across the polished floor of the foyer, the bold words, eviction, staring up at her like an accusation. The realization hit her with the force of a physical slap. Ebony had not paid off their landlord. Ebony had become their landlord. She had bought the debt. She had bought the building, and she had done it solely to have the pleasure of kicking them out. "She is the owner," Chantel screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill shriek of disbelief and rage. She pointed a shaking finger at the papers on the floor. Look at the signature. That is Ebony. She bought the penthouse. She owns the building, Brad. She owns our home." Brad looked up, his face pale. "What do you mean she owns it?" "She is the landlord," Chantel yelled, kicking the pile of papers. "That bitch is our landlord. She sat at our table and ate our food and promised to fix our housing situation. And this is how she fixes it, by throwing us onto the street. We have 24 hours. 24 hours, Brad. My clothes are in there. My studio is in there. She is going to lock us out. She played us. She played us all. She scammer us." She laughed in our faces while she held the keys to my destruction in her Versace purse. "She is a monster." Amidst the echoing screams of his daughter, Desmond looked down at the thick envelope in his own hands. His fingers, usually so steady and commanding, were trembling uncontrollably. He felt a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach, a premonition that the nightmare was far from over. Chantel was hysterical on the floor, waving her eviction notice, but Desmond knew that whatever was inside his packet would be worse. This was the house. This was the legacy. The Adams estate was the symbol of his authority, the physical proof that he was a man of substance. He tore open the seal, the sound ripping through the tense atmosphere like a gunshot. He pulled out the documents. They were heavy on quality bond paper. He adjusted his glasses, his breath catching in his throat as he read the bold red text stamped across the top of the first page. Notice of default and election to sell under deed of trust. It was a foreclosure notice. His mind reeled. He tried to make sense of the words. It said the loan was in default. It said the arrears were over 6 months past due. It said the full balance was now due immediately. But that was impossible. Brad had said it was insurance. Brad had said the house was protected in a trust. Desmond scanned the document frantically looking for the name of the bank. He needed to call the bank manager. He needed to explain the misunderstanding. His eyes found the line identifying the creditor and beneficiary. The name of the bank was crossed out. In its place, typed in clear, undeniable letters, was a new name: Nemesis Ventures LLC. And below it, signed as the authorized agent, was the name that stopped his heart: Ebony Adams. Viola peered over his shoulder and let out a strangled gasp. She read the name out loud, her voice a whisper of pure horror. Ebony, she owns the debt. Desmond dropped the paper as if it were coated in poison. The room began to tilt. The walls of the foyer, the striped wallpaper he had picked out 20 years ago, seemed to close in on him. She did not pay off the mortgage. He rasped, his voice barely audible. She bought it. She bought the bad debt from the bank. She is foreclosing on us. The betrayal hit him harder than a physical blow. His daughter, the one he had cast aside, the one he had lectured about loyalty, had secretly purchased the roof over his head. She held the deed. She held the power. And she was using it to crush him. A sharp, agonizing pain bloomed in the center of his chest, radiating down his left arm. It felt like an iron fist squeezing his heart. He tried to take a breath, but the air would not enter his lungs. His vision blurred the edges, turning gray. Desmond. Desmond. Look at me. Viola screamed, grabbing his arm as he swayed. He clutched his chest, his face turning an ashen shade of gray. His knees gave way and he slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor with a heavy thud. He was conscious, but the world was swimming. He could hear Viola screaming for Brad. He could hear Chantel crying, but all he could see was that signature on the floor. Ebony Adams. She had not come to save them. She had come to take everything. He had traded his daughter for a con man, and now he was paying the price with the very ground he sat on. The pain in his chest was terrifying, but the pain of his shattered pride was unbearable. He was a king who had just realized his throne was owned by the person he had banished. Brad stood over the chaotic scene in the foyer, ignoring his wife's screams and his father-in-law's gasping breaths. His survival instinct had kicked in, and it had narrowed his world down to the heavy manila envelope in his sweating hands. The other two had been disasters, but his was the thickest. It had to contain the solution. Ebony had always had a soft spot for him, or at least he told himself that. She surely wouldn't destroy the father of her future nieces and nephews. She probably set up a trust fund or a buyout clause. He convinced himself that the thickness of the package represented layers of cash protection, not layers of legal doom. With trembling fingers, he tore the seal, breaking the red wax stamp that looked ominously like a drop of dried blood. He pulled the stack of papers out, expecting to see bank routing numbers or a settlement agreement. Instead, he saw the seal of the Superior Court and the words, "Civil complaint for damages and injunctive relief." His eyes darted down the page, skimming past the legal jargon to the list of causes of action. Count 1, wire fraud. Count 2, forgery. Count 3, elder abuse and financial exploitation. Count 4, racketeering and Corrupt Organizations Act violations. Brad felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and dizzy. This was not a check. This was an indictment. He flipped the page, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled like a dry leaf. He scanned the details. The lawsuit laid out his entire scheme with terrifying precision. It listed the dates of the transfers. It listed the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that he thought were untraceable. It listed the exact amounts he had siphoned from Desmond's retirement fund to pay the syndicate in Miami. Ebony knew everything. She knew about the fake developers. She knew about the Ponzi payments. She knew about the gambling debts. But how? How could she prove intent? He could always claim it was just a bad investment that the market crashed. He could claim he was a victim too. He started to formulate the lie in his head, a desperate story to tell the judge. Then he turned to the section labeled Exhibit A. Clipped to the back of the lawsuit was a glossy photo printout. It was a high-resolution still frame from a video. The timestamp in the corner read, Thanksgiving Day 8 p.m. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It showed Brad leaning over the desk in Desmond's study. He was pointing at a document. Desmond was holding a pen, looking confused. The caption below the photo was a transcript of the audio recorded at that exact moment. Brad's voice. This is just standard asset protection. Think of it like insurance. It locks in the equity. Ebony had been there. She had been standing outside the door recording the entire conversation. She had him on tape, knowingly lying to an elderly man to trick him into signing a mortgage deed that he claimed was insurance. She had the smoking gun. She had the confession. She had the proof of intent that would put him in federal prison for 20 years. Brad dropped the packet. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, landing next to Chantel's eviction notice. He backed away, his legs feeling like jelly. He looked at Desmond, who was still clutching his chest on the floor. He realized with a sickening jolt that he could not spin this. He could not charm his way out of this. Ebony had not just cut off the money. She had meticulously documented his crimes and handed them to the authorities on a silver platter. The police were likely already on their way. The siren he heard in the distance might be an ambulance for Desmond, or it might be a squad car for him. For the first time in his life, the con artist realized the con was over. He was not going to be rich. He was going to be an inmate. The wail of sirens cut through the crisp morning air like a serrated knife slicing through the silence of the estate. It started as a distant hum, but within seconds it grew into a deafening roar that seemed to be coming from every direction at once. Blue and red lights began to flash through the sheer curtains, washing the living room in a chaotic strobe effect of emergency colors. Viola dropped her champagne flute, and it shattered on the hardwood floor, sending shards of crystal flying near Desmond's head. She thought it was the ambulance for her husband. She rushed to the window, her hands trembling, expecting to see paramedics running up the walk to save the patriarch of the family. Instead, she saw a convoy of black SUVs blocking the driveway. Men and women in windbreakers with yellow bold lettering were swarming the lawn. They moved with a terrifying precision and speed that signaled this was not a medical emergency. It was a raid. Before Viola could even turn around to warn the others, a booming voice amplified by a megaphone shook the windows. "Federal agents, we have a warrant. Come to the door with your hands up." Brad froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. The arrogance that had defined him just moments ago vanished completely, replaced by the primal fear of a hunted animal. He looked at the back door, his eyes darting wildly, considering a run for the fence. But the heavy thud of boots on the back porch told him he was surrounded. There was nowhere to go. The front door burst open with a resounding crash as the lock gave way under the force of a battering ram. Agents flooded the foyer, guns drawn, their voices shouting overlapping commands. "FBI, nobody move. Hands where we can see them. Get on the ground, now." Chantel screamed a high-pitched sound of pure terror and dropped to her knees, shielding her head with her hands. Viola stood frozen by the window, her mouth agape, unable to process that armed federal agents were storming her respectable home. Desmond groaned on the floor, too weak to move, watching the chaos unfold from ground level. Brad tried to back away toward the kitchen, his hands half raised. "Wait," he stammered, his voice cracking. "There is a mistake. I am a businessman. Let me call my lawyer. I can explain everything." An agent moved on him fast, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. Brad grunted as the air left his lungs. His cheek was pressed against the expensive wallpaper he had never paid for. "Hands behind your back," the agent barked, snapping cold metal handcuffs onto Brad's wrists. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." As the cuffs clicked shut, something in Brad snapped. The facade of the loving husband and the successful investor crumbled, revealing the coward underneath. He began to thrash against the agent's grip, his eyes bulging. "It was not me," he screamed, his voice shrill and desperate. "It was her." He twisted his head to look at Chantel, who was sobbing on the floor. "It was my wife. She made me do it." Chantel looked up, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. What she gasped. She knew everything Brad yelled, spitting as he spoke. "Look at her. Look at the bags. Look at the shoes. She spent the money. She pressured me. She said she needed to look rich for her Instagram. I did it for her. She is the one you want. She is the mastermind. I was just trying to keep her happy. She is the one who wanted the penthouse. She is the one who wanted the cars." Chantel stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The betrayal hit her harder than the eviction notice. This was the man she had defended to her sister. This was the man she had called a genius. This was the love of her life. And without a second of hesitation, he was throwing her to the wolves to save his own skin. "You are lying," she shrieked, scrambling to her feet before an agent pushed her back down. "You liar! You told me you were a crypto genius. You told me the money was real. I did what I had to do to pay for your lifestyle," Brad bellowed as the agents began to drag him toward the door. "You are a parasite, Chantel, a gold digger. You bled me dry, and now you are going to let me take the fall. Arrest her too. Check her accounts. She spent the stolen money. She is an accomplice." Viola rushed forward, her maternal instinct finally overriding her shock. "Stop it!" she cried, grabbing the arm of the agent holding Brad. "You cannot take him. He is a good boy. He is sick. He has a heart condition. You are going to kill him. This is all a misunderstanding. My daughter Ebony will clear this up. She is a powerful woman. She will sue you all." The agent looked at Viola with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Ma'am, step back or you will be arrested for obstruction. Your daughter Ebony is the one who provided the evidence. We have the video files. We have the bank records. There is no misunderstanding. This man has been stealing from you and your husband for 2 years. He does not have a heart condition. He has a gambling addiction and a debt to the mob." The words hung in the air, silencing Viola effectively. She looked at Brad, searching for a denial, searching for the righteous indignation of an innocent man. But Brad would not meet her eyes. He was too busy pleading with the agents, trying to cut a deal, trying to trade information about his wife for leniency. Desmond, watching from the floor, felt a tear slide down his cheek. It was not a tear of physical pain from his heart, but a tear of absolute shame. He had sat at the head of the table and praised this man. He had called him a son. He had insulted Ebony, comparing her to this criminal. He had handed over the deed to his house, the legacy of his ancestors, to a thief because he was too blinded by greed and appearance to see the truth. The sirens outside seemed to be wailing a mourning song for the Addams family reputation. The agents hauled Brad out the front door. He was kicking and screaming, shouting obscenities at Chantel, shouting that he was the victim, shouting that everyone had used him. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, phones out, recording the spectacle. The same neighbors the Addams family had tried so hard to impress were now capturing their ultimate humiliation in high definition. Chantel sat amidst the scattered papers of her eviction notice, sobbing into her hands. Viola slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting next to her husband. The house was silent now, except for the crackle of the police radios and the sound of Chantel weeping. The champagne was flat. The dream was dead. And in the center of the wreckage sat the undeniable truth that Ebony had won. She had not just defeated them. She had allowed them to destroy themselves. The flashing lights of the police cruisers painted the front of the house in chaotic strokes of red and blue as I stepped out of my car. I had waited down the street until the chaos peaked, watching the federal agents drag Brad away in handcuffs. Now that the storm had passed, leaving only wreckage in its wake, it was time for me to survey the damage. I walked up the driveway, my heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete, a steady beat against the backdrop of sobbing and police radio chatter. The neighbors were gathered on the sidewalk, whispering and pointing, but I did not look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the front door, the threshold I had been banished from so many times. An officer recognized me and lifted the yellow tape. "Ms. Addams," he said, nodding respectfully. "The scene is secure. You can go inside." I thanked him with a curt nod and stepped into the foyer. The air inside smelled of fear and stale champagne. It was a tableau of absolute misery. Chantel was curled into a ball on the floor, weeping into the carpet, her expensive dress ruined. Desmond was sitting against the wall, his face gray, his eyes staring blankly at nothing. And standing in the center of the room, shaking with a mixture of shock and rage, was my mother. Viola looked up as I entered. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. When her eyes locked onto me, the devastation on her face instantly hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She did not see the daughter who had saved them from further fraud. She only saw the enemy. "You!" She screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "You did this! You brought them here! You traitor!" I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, radiating a calm that seemed to infuriate her even more. "I did not do this, Mother," I said, my voice cool and level. "Brad broke the law. You signed the papers. I simply made sure the authorities had the correct address." "You set us up!" Viola shrieked. She took a step toward me, her hands forming into claws. "You gator! You jealous, vindictive little witch! You could not stand to see us happy. You could not stand that we loved him. You wanted to ruin us." She lunged at me, screaming like a banshee, intent on tearing the face off the woman who had humiliated her. She never reached me. Before she could take 2 steps, 2 massive men in dark suits materialized from behind me. My personal security detail. One of them stepped forward and caught Viola by the wrists, stopping her momentum with the ease of a man catching a child. He held her firm, not hurting her, but making it physically impossible for her to move another inch. Viola struggled against his grip, kicking and spitting, but she was powerless. "Let me go!" she yelled, thrashing wildly. "I will kill her! I will kill her for what she did to this family." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I watched her struggle with a detached curiosity, looking at her like a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "You are embarrassing yourself, Viola," I said softly. "And you are mistaken. I did not trap you. I freed you. I removed the parasite you were feeding. You should be thanking me." "Thank you." Viola spat, her eyes wide and manic. "I curse the day you were born. You are no daughter of mine." I signaled to the bodyguard and he released her, gently pushing her back toward the living room. She stumbled and caught herself on the back of a chair, breathing heavily. I adjusted my jacket and looked at the 3 of them. "You are right," I said. "I am not your daughter anymore. I am your landlord. I am the owner of the debt you could not pay. And I am the only reason you are not in handcuffs right now, along with your beloved Brad. So I suggest you lower your voice. You are guests in my house, and I have a very strict policy against noise." My father Desmond, who had spent his entire life towering over me with judgments and expectations, finally moved from his spot against the wall. He did not stand up to defend his wife. He did not rush to comfort his hysterical daughter. Instead, he did something that made the air leave the room. He crawled. He dragged himself across the polished hardwood floor on his hands and knees, moving toward me like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. The man who had taught me to never show weakness was now humiliating himself in front of the police, the neighbors, and his own children. He reached my feet and grabbed the hem of my white trousers, his hands shaking violently. "Ebony, please," he choked out, his voice wet with tears. "You have to stop this. You have to call the lawyers. You have to stop the foreclosure. I cannot lose this house. It is all I have left." I looked down at him, feeling a mixture of pity and revulsion. "You lost this house the moment you signed those papers, Dad," I said coldly. "You trusted a thief over your own daughter." Desmond looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "I know," he sobbed. "I know. And that is the worst part, Ebony." "I knew." I froze. "What did you say?" He lowered his head until his forehead touched the tip of my expensive shoe. "I knew he was a fraud. He whispered, the confessions spilling out of him like bile. I knew the returns were too high to be legal. I knew his stories did not add up. I suspected he was robbing Peter to pay Paul. But I did not care. I was greedy, Ebony. I was so greedy. He promised me 10 times my investment. He promised me that I would be the richest man at the country club. I wanted that feeling. I wanted to walk in there and have everyone envy me. I wanted the status more than I wanted the truth. So I looked the other way. I let him take your car. I let him insult you. I let him take over this family because I thought he was going to make me a king. The room went deadly silent. Even Viola stopped struggling against the bodyguard. Chantel stopped crying. We all stared at the man on the floor who had just admitted that he had sold his family out, not out of ignorance but out of vanity. He had knowingly gambled our safety for his own ego. I pulled my foot away from his grasp, stepping back as if he were contagious. The last shred of respect I held for him evaporated in that moment. I looked at him not as a father, but as a pathetic old man worshipping a false god of prestige. "You do not love me, Dad," I said, my voice trembling with a quiet fury. "You never loved me. You only loved the way I made you look. When I was a successful executive, I was your trophy. When I lost my job, I was your shame. And when Brad promised you more money than I could give you, traded me in without a second thought. You do not want me to save you because you love me. You want me to save you because you cannot bear the thought of your friends knowing you are a failure. You do not care about being homeless. You care about looking homeless." Desmond reached for me again, his fingers grasping at the air. "No, Ebony, please. I am your father." "You are a stranger." I interrupted, my voice hard as stone. "And I do not lend money to strangers, especially ones with bad credit and worse morals. Stand up, Desmond. You are ruining the crease in my pants. And you have a lot of packing to do. You have 23 hours left." I reached into my designer purse, the leather soft and cool under my fingertips. My family watched me with bated breath, their eyes tracking my every movement. Even in their ruin, a spark of delusion remained. They hoped that perhaps now that I had shamed them and legally crushed them, I would offer a mercy branch. They hoped that I would pull out a checkbook or the keys to a modest condo in the suburbs, something to save them from the indignity of the streets. I pulled my hand out. I was holding a single tarnished silver key on a cheap frayed plastic ring. It was ugly and scratched, a stark contrast to the gleaming marble and crystal of the foyer. I held it out for a moment, letting them see it. Then I opened my fingers. The key fell. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a sharp, lonely clatter that sounded like a judgment. It slid a few inches and came to rest right between my mother's expensive heels and my father's trembling knees. "What is this?" Viola whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and dread. "Is this a safe house? Is it an apartment for us?" I looked down at them, my expression unreadable. "It is an apartment," I said, my voice flat, "but it is not the kind you are used to." "That key opens the door to Unit 4B at the Cascade Gardens complex in South Atlanta." Chantel gasped, a sound of pure horror. She knew the name. Everyone in Atlanta knew that complex. It was synonymous with poverty and crime. It was the place you threatened your children with if they did not study hard. It was the place where I had lived for the last 6 months, hiding from stray bullets and counting pennies. "It is a studio," I continued, describing their new reality with brutal precision. "It is about 400 square feet. The carpet is stained. The heater rattles when it turns on, and the hot water is a luxury, not a guarantee. The window looks out onto an alley where you will hear sirens all night long. It is the exact same apartment I slept in when you told me I was not welcome here. It is the place where I learned what hunger felt like while you were eating feast dinners." My father looked at the key on the floor as if it were radioactive. "We cannot live there, Ebony," he pleaded. "Your mother is delicate. Chantel is used to a certain standard. It is dangerous." "It is reality," I snapped, cutting him off. "And it is the only roof I am offering you. Consider this my final act of charity. I have paid the rent for the first month. You have 30 days of shelter on my dime, 30 days to find jobs, 30 days to learn how to budget, 30 days to realize that the world does not owe you a mansion just because your last name is Adams. I turned to leave, adjusting my blazer. The air in the house felt heavy, suffocating with their shock. They were paralyzed, staring at that cheap piece of metal as if it were the end of the world. "And one more thing," I said, pausing with my hand on the doorknob. I looked back at them one last time. "I would suggest you keep your food in sealed containers and sleep with the lights on. The rats in that building are quite aggressive. They are big and they are hungry and they do not like sharing their territory. Good luck with them. They are the only roommates you're going to have now." I walked out the door and let it slam shut behind me, sealing them in with their fate. I walked down the stone steps of the porch for the very last time. The air outside was sweet and thick with the scent of blooming magnolias, but to me it smelled like oxygen after years of holding my breath. Behind me, through the thick oak door, I could still hear the muffled sounds of wailing. It sounded like a funeral. In a way, it was. It was the funeral of the daughter they thought they could use and abuse forever. I did not look back. I did not turn my head to see my mother pounding on the window or my sister collapsing on the lawn in her ruined dress. I kept my eyes forward, focused entirely on the midnight blue Rolls-Royce that waited for me like a chariot. I opened the heavy door and slid into the driver's seat. The silence inside the cabin was instant and absolute. It was a vacuum sealing out their toxicity and their noise. I pressed the start button and the engine purred to life, a low vibration that felt like pure power. I rested my hands on the leather steering wheel, taking a deep, steady breath. For the first time in years, my chest did not hurt. The invisible weight that had been crushing me, the obligation, the guilt, the desperate need for their approval was gone. I had left it on the floor of that foyer, along with the key to the slum. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was already lighting up with a frenzy of notifications, missed calls from Viola, text messages from Chantel begging for a second chance. Voicemails from my father, likely filled with more excuses and pleas. I looked at the names flashing on the screen. Mom, Dad, Sister. They were just words now, labels that had lost all meaning. I did not press block. Blocking them would mean I still acknowledged their existence. Instead, I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small metal tool. I popped the SIM card tray open. The tiny chip, the digital umbilical cord that connected me to their madness, fell into my palm. I rolled down the window and flicked the SIM card onto the gravel driveway. It landed somewhere in the dirt, lost forever. I pulled a brand new phone from the passenger seat. It was already activated with a new number. A number known only to my lawyer, my banker, and the pilot of my private jet. To my family, I was now a ghost. They could scream into the void all they wanted. They could type desperate texts until their fingers bled, but those messages would never reach me. The line was dead. I shifted the car into drive and eased onto the road. The GPS on the dashboard was already set. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, private terminal. My flight plan was filed. Paris, the city of lights. I had a suite reserved at the Ritz and a week of peace ahead of me. I was going to drink champagne that I bought with my own money and sleep in sheets that did not smell of regret. The sun was beginning to set, painting the Atlanta sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold. It was beautiful. I watched the estate disappear in my rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a speck and then nothing at all. I turned up the music, letting the bass fill the cabin. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I was wealthy. I was powerful. And most importantly, for the first time in my life, I was truly free. I pressed the accelerator and drove into the horizon, leaving the darkness behind me forever. This story teaches us that family is defined by loyalty and respect, not just blood. Ebony's journey proves that you cannot save people who are committed to using you. Real power comes from knowing your worth and having the courage to cut toxic ties even if it hurts. You should never set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. Sometimes the best justice is simply letting people face the consequences of their own choices while you move on to better things. If you enjoyed this story of cold hard justice, make sure to follow us for more satisfying revenge stories.